Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christina Pope. I'm the Welcoming America Senior Network Director. And on behalf of our organization, I'd like to welcome you to this Welcoming Interactive 2021 session titled Improving Immigrant Access to Housing and Small Business Recovery Efforts. And please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd love to see where all the attendees are coming from today. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Walmart and Western Union for their sponsorship of the Interactive and of our ongoing work here at Welcoming America. So big shout out to them. And we'd also like to review a couple of housekeeping items. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please go ahead and enter them in the chat and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. And my colleague Jenny Diaz is on deck to respond to any technical questions. So if you're having any tech issues or wondering about the presentation, where you can find it, we'll do our best to respond to all of those questions in the chat and then get to some Q&A at the end with our presenters. And we also invite you to engage on social media during the session using the hashtag Interactive2021. So please share that you're attending and any content that you think people in your social networks would find helpful and inspirational. I'm really grateful to be joined today by three powerful practitioners. When the pandemic began, they all recognized immediately that people of color, immigrants, women, and low-income households would be among the hardest hit. And they set about improving access to resources as they became available. So today we'll be learning specifically about their efforts to improve immigrant residents' access to housing and small business supports in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Champaign County, Illinois, what they've learned, and how to apply these strategies to improve equitable access moving forward as we're looking at recovery. And these were all efforts that they undertook in the Welcoming Economies program in 2020, where they tapped into a peer learning community and technical assistance from us at Welcoming America and our great partner, Global Detroit, to really help achieve their local economic inclusion goals. So in the spirit of peer learning, today we'll be using a two-way interview format followed by audience questions. So first, we'll hear from Gloria, who will be interviewing, we'll hear from Jeremy and Pierce, who will be interviewing Gloria, and then we'll hear from Gloria, who will be interviewing Jeremy and Pierce. So to begin our introductions, on my left in Zoom is the wonderful Gloria Yen. So Gloria, over to you. Looks like you're on mute.
Great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's great to be here with all of you today. I'm Gloria, and I work at the YMCA of the University of Illinois in Champaign, Illinois, where I get to lead immigrant welcoming and inclusion initiatives under the banner of our New American Welcome Center. This includes a blend of direct and referral services, including a multilingual helpline, immigration legal services, a community navigators program, community bridge building initiatives, and student leadership development. Like each of you in this room, we've had to make adjustments and pivots over the course of the past year to ensure that we're still being responsive to community needs. I'm happy to be here and to share more about some of those efforts with you today. I'm going to pass it off to, on the right of me on my Zoom screen currently is Jeremy. Jeremy, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Gloria. My name is Jeremy Carter. I'm the manager of Housing Opportunity Fund consumer programs at the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Pittsburgh. The URA of Pittsburgh is the city's economic development arm. We are a separate quasi-governmental agency serving the city of Pittsburgh. The department I work in, the Housing Opportunity Fund, is a housing trust fund for the city of Pittsburgh, where we invest $10 million a year for 12 years towards affordable housing. On the other side of the URA is our business solution side, which helps small businesses get off the ground and grow their businesses. So on below me in Zoom is my colleague, Pierce Robinson.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Hello, everyone. My name is Pierce Robinson. I'm the manager of diversified business solutions at the URA. The three areas that I lead I lead our workforce development and career services initiative. I lead our external MWBE programming initiatives, and I manage the team that oversees all the inbound requests for funding and technical assistance relating to small businesses, in the city of Pittsburgh. So that's me. And I think now it is time to transition over to our interview. So Gloria, are you ready? Okay, let's get to it. So Gloria, can you tell us about your work in the Welcoming Economies program? Where were you with reaching immigrant renters and business owners when you began? And what did your partnership with Champaign County Economic Development Corporation look like?
Sure. So the University YMCA joined the Welcoming Economies program at the beginning of the pandemic. And to be honest, prior to that, our direct engagement with immigrant renters and business owners was pretty limited. We primarily interacted with renters insofar as they needed assistance with landlord and tenant issues at our pro bono legal clinics, and also with business owners as vendors, essentially, or sponsors for special events, but it really didn't extend much past that. More broadly, however, we had been thinking about and working toward developing a countywide welcoming plan to promote equitable access, civic engagement, economic opportunity, and safe and connected communities for all. And so as part of that process, and through that process, we engaged our local economic development corporation for Champaign County pretty early on. We jointly released a demographic and economic snapshot of immigrants in our community back in May of 2018, thanks to support from both Welcoming America and the New American Economies Gateway for Growth program. The executive director of the Economic Development Corporation chaired our economic development working group of our welcoming plan. And when we were selected for a Welcoming Economies training from Global Detroit, the Economic Development Corporation helped us to both plan and host the training for local economic development leaders in September of 2019. So we had a foundation laid and built. When we were accepted together for the Welcoming Economies program last year at the beginning around January or February, we were really excited about continuing to jointly build upon our existing foundation to advance economic inclusion in Champaign County. And little did we know, any of us here in this room today, that the pandemic was about to hit. But we were so glad that we were part of the pilot program for Welcoming Economies during that time and able to continue thinking together, not only with the Economic Development Corporation, but with Jeremy, with Pierce, with Christina and Steve, and so many others of our colleagues in Pittsburgh and in Louisville to think about how we could respond. Part of our local response included working with the Economic Development Corporation, which invited us to join a weekly meeting of economic development leaders that really has played a key role for us locally in keeping us appraised of everything from the latest developments in health and economic relief to also helping us to make sure that we have a platform to be continually elevating the visibility of the ongoing challenges and shifting challenges that have been faced by immigrant renters and businesses. Really, it's thanks to strong leadership from our local Economic Development Corporation, the university, the public health district, university, local government, and so many others that I think our Champaign County in and of itself has been able to stand out in the state of Illinois as an exemplar for the way that communities can responsibly and innovatively navigate the challenges of the pandemic.
So Gloria, you touched on this a little bit in your answer, but as part of the Welcoming Economies work last year, what were the goals that your agency set out and how did you go about reaching those goals?
All right, so we had three specific goals for the Welcoming Economies program. They were initially specific to and created for our work with businesses in mind, but ultimately were applicable to our housing assistance efforts as well. And the goals were, one, to connect businesses to resources to help them survive the pandemic. Two, to establish both the YMCA and our Economic Development Corporation as access points and trusted connectors for immigrant businesses. And three, to establish our credibility with local institutions and to emerge from the crisis as a leader and trusted connector. In terms of how we work towards accomplishing and achieving these goals, we formed a firstly, a multilingual internal business response team at the Y that met on a weekly basis. And we worked to do a lot of different things. As I was preparing for this session, I was like, wow, we actually did do a lot. So we centralized information about business relief and supports by creating a resource guide for immigrants. We also developed a comprehensive list of local businesses. We assessed the impact of COVID-19 on business operations by conducting one-on-one interviews with 30 local business owners from 10 different countries. We also increased the visibility of the disparate impact of the pandemic on immigrants that we were seeing by distilling our findings from the interviews into a report that we shared broadly with stakeholders, and enabled us to continue connecting and providing businesses with available assistance and information. So those are kind of some examples of the initiatives that we were pursuing, and really throughout the process, we were able to, like I mentioned earlier, learn about and try out different approaches with the help of our welcoming economies, coaches, and peers. We also, I would say, we engaged in an ongoing process of listening to residents and responding, listening again, responding again and again and again, each time learning and refining and improving. And so by doing so, I think this was one of the key pieces of the work that we did and why it was successful. We were able to provide individually tailored one-on-one resourcing to folks. And this included everything from facilitating language access to helping people understand the difference, for example, between grants and loans, helping people navigate online application processes, organize their documentation, and whenever possible, making sure that we were continuing to broker trusted connections, not only to us and not only to the Economic Development Corporation, but really also back to other existing community institutions. So we were able to connect business owners not only to the resources that they need, but also to one another. And we did that through a series of monthly roundtable convenings, featuring local partners and institutions like our Small Business Development Center, also a local business association, for example. And as part of our efforts to raise the visibility of the work and also the disparate impact and ongoing need, we did so not only through those weekly meetings with the Economic Development Corporation, but also by promoting immigrant businesses through our newsletter, through showcases and Facebook features. Our economic development intern actually earlier this week counted the number of features that we've done to date since the onset of the pandemic, and it's been over 50. And that's been just a really fun way for us to engage with and interact with business owners and potential consumers on online platforms. On the renter side of things, our immigrant helpline, we didn't have to do as much kind of like outreach and laying the groundwork because our immigrant helpline was almost immediately inundated with requests for assistance from our Immigrant Relief Fund. This was a fund that was actually established back in 2019 by a local church to help the Y address emergency needs faced by immigrants. And we were really able to build upon that over the course of the pandemic. So our team really worked carefully to understand the existing networks of support in place, to develop a consensus-based decision-making process, and to mitigate access barriers. So we're talking about language, technology, immigration legal status, all sorts of things. And we did so in order to leverage what we knew were limited resources to address housing, food, and economic insecurity. So those are some of the ways that we went about reaching our goals.
Wow, that's great. I learned a lot of things, and I'm just thinking about some things that I want to incorporate just based on some of the things you mentioned. And I know this is an ongoing process. It might be a little hard to measure, but from your perspective, what impact do you think that you saw, just overall, just from all these efforts?
Yeah, I think that one measurable way was just looking at the amount of assistance we've been able to either directly distribute or facilitate access to. So since the beginning of the pandemic, we've distributed over $300,000 in direct assistance to immigrant renters and business owners. And then additionally, we have facilitated and ensured access to another $450,000 from various entities. Some of these are private funds, some of these are administered, for example, by our local regional planning commission, some of these are administered through statewide coalitions and entities, but just making sure that we were mitigating and addressing and removing where possible different barriers in place. And so I think that had a significant impact on helping people meet the immediate needs that were in front of them at a time where there was and continues to be a lot of uncertainty. And then I think just as important, we have increased our credibility, both with immigrants and with local institutions. And that has really allowed us to find different ways of collaboration, and it continues to inform and enhance our initiatives. So we're excited that we have, it wasn't that there wasn't a foundation there before, but because of the work that we've embarked on over the course of the past year, it's really strengthened and solidified the partnerships and relationships that we have. And so we are excited to kind of move forward with those moving into the future pandemic and outside of the pandemic.
Sorry, I was frozen there for a second. So Gloria, looking forward, right? There's a lot of good things that your agency did in the last year. So can you talk a little bit about kind of what do things look like moving forward? What lessons you've learned that you're going to take with you in the next phases of your response work? And if you can, if you're able to touch on, with the upcoming funding from the American Rescue Plan, does your agency plan to do anything with that, with your efforts?
Yeah, sure thing. So I did not know how essentially, for example, the CARES Act funding was exactly flowing down, or even the American Rescue Plan, but I looked it up and wrote it down. So in the state of Illinois, we had $636 million worth of business interruption grants that were distributed across the state, thanks to funding that was federal from the CARES Act. We also had $250 million in local coronavirus urgent remediation emergency support programs. Locally, these were administered by our city governments to provide reimbursements for PPE purchases for local immigrant business owners. And then Illinois also had $300 million allocated in a housing assistance program with regard to rent and utilities. And so during the course of the past year, we worked with our local partners to brainstorm and to implement accessible channels to this money, even though I didn't always know where the money was coming from. And we'll continue to rely on those with the release of the American Rescue Plan funds. And so we expect an additional $585 million in federal emergency rental assistance funds from the American Rescue Plan. We also know that the state is additionally, I think, adding some supplemental funds to that. And moving forward, one of our big pushes, especially for the month of May, is to make sure that the business owners that we're working with are aware of and can access and go complete the process of applying for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund that just opened for applications on Monday and has an eligibility period of February 2020 all the way to March 2023. I'll just say that again because I think that's crazy. February 2020 to March 2023 with a range of at minimum $1,000 all the way up to $5 million. And so we want to make sure that through all of these different processes, we're continuing to serve as trusted connectors, continuing to help people with their applications. We have good groundwork laid with local partners who understand why certain application questions may be prohibitive or scare different members of the immigrant community off. And our staff on both ends know how to navigate that and continue to facilitate access. So we'll continue to do that. And moving forward, I think one additional thing we want to ensure that we do is continue to elevate both the visibility and the multiplicity of the immigrant journeys and stories amidst ongoing challenges, and not to be kind of reductive in the narrative that we're even sharing with our stakeholders as the pandemic continues.
That's great. Yeah, I'm glad you repeated that because going through 2023, and I think that really shows your commitment to recovery efforts in the long term. So that's great. Yeah, thank you, Gloria, for sharing kind of your experience in Champaign. I mean, I think you guys are doing a lot of great stuff. And when I think about our work in Pittsburgh, I mean, we've probably talked about this before, but we have some similar themes here, including really relying and building on these trusted connectors and how important that is and how impactful it's been. And the simple idea of listening to our community, responding, doing it again and again and again. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Jeremy. All right, so now it's my turn to put Pierce and Jeremy in the hot seat, and I'm really excited for what they have to share with all of you today. So the first question I have for the two of you is, where were you with reaching immigrant renters, home buyers, and business owners when you started to tackle the goal of more equitable access to your programs? What was your relationship to welcoming efforts coordinated by the mayor's office and to immigrant service providers? Let's go to Jeremy and then to Pierce.
Sure. So, well, when we first started, we were working in this space for about a month or two before COVID happened. So our initial goals were to really just start reaching out to more immigrants and refugee homeowners and renters in general. But of course, then in March, we all came together and said, yep, we need to pivot and address some of these more emergent needs in our community, like making sure people have a roof over their head during COVID. So, you know, we were not really connected to the mayor's office of Welcoming Pittsburgh. We're all part of the city government, but, you know, we're just different departments, different offices, and we really never really engaged with them until our work started with Welcoming America. So it was because of Welcoming America that we were able to really come together on mutual goals. And from there, really talked and met weekly and developed some really, really strong relationships that go back and forth on helping each other with our housing resources and housing goals. You know, big part of, well, one part of Welcoming Pittsburgh's kind of roadmap for equity is really focusing on affordable housing for immigrant and refugee neighbors in our city. And so there was a natural connection to us at the URA and the housing department to really come together as a city government and see what we can do. So, you know, we also made an intentional effort to fund the largest immigrant and refugee service organization in our area to administer the rental assistance program for us. Before COVID, we had 4 to 5 different social service agencies running the rental assistance program for us. In April, we expanded it to 12 different agencies to meet the demand, with one of them being, you know, Jewish Community and Children's Services, who is the large immigrant and refugee agency. So we wanted to do that intentionally because we had a mix of stimulus and local funding to really expand rental assistance, and wanted to make sure we use the local funding so that there weren't any issues or even perceptions of, you know, big government funds coming in and what does that mean with citizenship status. We wanted to just remove that and really focus on using our local funding, which we have no restrictions on. And we're actually very cognizant and very intentional of saying that in community meetings, that there is no citizenship requirement for these funds, and just making that very clear so that it's more welcoming to apply for that assistance. So these are the types of things that we were really thinking about strategically and how we work with Welcoming Pittsburgh. And so, you know, it was great because before Welcoming America, didn't even talk to each other, didn't know each other. And through 2020, throughout this work, we have become really, really close and talk a lot. And you'll hear later on, you know, we're building on other programs and services well after Welcome to America work ended.
Thank you, Jeremy. That's incredible. Do you have anything to add, Pierce?
Yeah, I think my experience was a tad bit different than Jeremy's. I started like maybe a month after Jeremy, just because the individual who was supposed to represent business, she she got promoted to director of lending. Then our like entire sort of department split, you know, into one half went to lending, the other half went to business solutions where I was. And business solutions is sort of like the medium between the public and lending. So that's why I was saying at the beginning, you know, we do all the consultations. So everyone sort of figured I would probably be the most appropriate person to take part in Welcome in Pittsburgh. And, you know, through my experience, when I got over there, you know, I was just trying to, you know, get acclimated and, you know, understand what was going on. And then, you know, they started asking really basic questions about, you know, how the business, you know, unit over at the URA was interacting with immigrants. And I mean, just to be frank, I didn't have any answers. We really didn't have anything in place prior to that to really measure or even assess, you know, how we were interacting with immigrants. And like Jeremy had mentioned, probably 30 days after I signed on with, you know, Welcome in Pittsburgh, COVID hit. So we rolled out some really specialized products for business owners in the city just to help get some money out the door and get some money into these businesses to help them, because we didn't know what was going to happen with COVID. So I think during that period, that was like the pilot for us. You know, we were like, okay, well, you know, we don't have this data in terms of the immigrant, you know, business owners that we're interacting with. So let's do that now. Let's, you know, start altering our applications just to check to see, you know, who, you know, from the immigrant, you know, populations are actually applying to our, you know, to our programs. And, you know, that was really eye-opening, just because we were interacting with a lot of immigrant businesses and we just weren't even aware of it, just because that wasn't something that we were asking in terms of, you know, our applications prior to that. So that was a really, really eye-opening exercise. And that sort of led us to really have some really serious conversations about, okay, well, you know, we are clearly deficient here. So what are we going to do now? And, you know, Welcome in Pittsburgh was a great, you know, sort of resource in terms of getting us to where, you know, we needed to be to make sure that we were being, you know, as inclusive as we possibly could. You know, then we started to realize that, you know, some of our marketing, you know, efforts weren't necessarily hitting these populations and these groups. So we started to adjust, you know, how we thought about marketing and, you know, different things like that. So we were really at the beginning stages. We were really in the, you know, from the business side, we were really, really behind. But, you know, our interaction with the mayor's office in Welcome Pittsburgh, you know, turned our sort of operation and our understanding of how to interact with the immigrant populations around completely.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear from both of you, just the incredible amount of collaboration and cohesive partnerships and the communication relationships that you were able to establish really quickly and rapidly. Some for Pierce, 30 days, within 30 days of starting on the job, to ensure that an equitable response was in place. And I think that for me, it, you know, begs the question of, you know, a lot of times in our communities, there are things that we're like, these aren't possible. But I think the pandemic has shown that where there's a will to ensure equitable access and remove those barriers for the communities that we're serving, that can really happen. So I really appreciated what both of you shared about how you started to tackle the goal, and also what you were doing. Can you share a little bit about perhaps what changed as a result of what you were doing, and also yeah, just what changed as a result? So let's go to Jeremy again and then to Pierce.
Yeah, so we had multiple things that we did to really try and get a handle on these problems that we were facing. Because remember, we were not really prepared to implement any new programs or services from the start of the work with Welcoming America. But that time not to be the onset of COVID, so we really had to think about what are the core programs and services that we really need to focus on, which were universal language translation services across all of our programs, modifying some program structure and guidelines to be more accommodating for immigrant and refugee residents, and expanding our outreach and access by working collaboratively with Welcoming Pittsburgh. So we knew that the immigrant and refugee community in Pittsburgh really did trust Welcoming Pittsburgh and the organization that we funded for rental assistance. So we worked to really build upon that trust and utilize those agencies to help get the word out about the programs, but also to solicit feedback. Don't get me wrong, we had many iterations of our services over 2020, and it was because of the direct feedback that we received from Welcoming Pittsburgh, the social service agencies, and I think possibly most important, the people that we were trying to serve. So I think this was one of the most important things that we acted on. When someone came to us and said that they, were not getting referrals, or it was difficult to access or apply to our program, we met with them, listened to all the concerns, asked questions, followed up with them, went back to advocate for changes to the program, with this overarching idea of making it easier and more accommodating for immigrant and refugee residents to access our housing programs. So, if we didn't solicit or invite the feedback, we would not have been able to serve, so just to give you an idea, before COVID, the number of households we served who identified as immigrant or refugees in the rental assistance programs was 5 or less. Through our efforts throughout 2020, as of last week, I think we've served 130 immigrant and refugee households to prevent eviction. So I don't think we would have hit that number had we not have really tried to solicit that feedback and act on it and revise and revise and revise and keep asking for feedback, because all of those changes really did help get the assistance out easier.
Thank you. Yeah, that constant iteration and incorporation and inviting, not just incorporating feedback that you were receiving. What about you, Pierce?
I think for us over with business, I think the change was really profound, because like I had mentioned before, we weren't, that wasn't something that was on our mind. So, once it was brought to us and, we were made aware of it, and then we actually, made the efforts to start, tracking these things, then we started to see the numbers. And, Jeremy can attest to this. Anyone, in the government space, they know that, we're huge on metrics and reporting and different things like that. So, once we actually had a data set to start reporting on, then it's, we are accountable to our board, we are accountable to the mayor, and more importantly, we are accountable to the residents of the city of Pittsburgh. So now that we see these numbers, it's like, okay, we have these numbers now. What are we going to do for this? What efforts are we going to put forth in terms of making sure that, we're not just hitting, the Black businesses and, things like that, that we're hitting, all the, sort of ethnic minorities that exist within the city. And how I mentioned earlier before about, some of our marketing efforts, we spend a lot of time on social media marketing, just because we know that a lot of businesses that we interact with in the city of Pittsburgh are on social media, just in general, the business owners just being social, but also, promoting their businesses and their products. And then one of the things that we realize is that, a lot of the immigrant businesses, we weren't hitting them on social media. That's not where they were in terms of consuming the information they needed about our particular services and different things like that. So, we made sort of a shift in terms of our approach. And just to reiterate some of the things that Jeremy had said, we really started trying to focus on some of those more trusted partners that, had these relationships with these businesses, where we could put, these resources and information really in their hands, and they were able to take it to, an interested parties in order to create that bond and to create that awareness of our products, because that was one of the greatest challenges for us. Like, businesses weren't even aware of us or what it is that we were able to provide. So I think that was probably the greatest sort of change as a result of us making a concentrated effort in terms of trying to go out and connect with, trusted partners and alter our marketing approach to really reach some of these underserved immigrant population as it relates to business owners.
Great. And the final question that I have for the two of you is that, given the increased awareness that community members have about the resources that you provide and the services that you do, the shifting approaches that you've made, the focus that you have on connecting folks with trusted partners, and your commitment to ongoing accountability, can you talk about what this will look like moving forward for equitable access? How are you going to be applying these new approaches, and what you learn to the next phase of response and recovery with more funds on the way from the American Rescue Plan and or other sources? So let's go first to Pierce this time, and then to Jeremy.
I'll jump in. I'll be brief, because I know Jeremy probably has a lot more to say about this. But for us over at business, I mean, just to be honest, we are copying our counterparts in housing. They've created, like, they came before us in terms of really making that concentrated effort to reach out to, the immigrant populations of renters and homeowners. So, we're basically following their lead. We know we have a lot of work to do, so we're following the blueprint they set up in terms of being able to connect with these established either community groups or actual individuals to be able to help just connect us directly with the people who need our services. Like I said, we need to do a better job of creating awareness. So, if it's an awareness thing, it's a language thing. We just want to make sure that, we are doing the best we can, in terms of getting our products into the people, into the hands of the folks that need them. And, we weren't doing that before. And instead of recreating the wheel, housing is already proved. They have a proven model of this. I know that, business services aren't in as great as demand as housing, but, those trusted resources, those trusted partners still exist, and they can communicate, our information the same way they can do housing. So that is sort of the format that we're approaching moving forward. And another thing I wanted to key in on is that we actually created a lot of minorities just across the board were shut out from a lot of the federal programs, including the PPP. So one of the things that we did was we created a fund. We got $10 million from one of our local banks, PNC Bank, and more than half of that was committed specifically to this fund. It's called the Minority Business Growth and Recovery Loan. And it was a really good loan product up to 100K, and it sort of mirrored the PPP. It wasn't forgiven, but the terms were really similar and really comparable. And we wanted to use that as our sort of launching pad of, okay, let's go and jump over and really focus on getting this information into the hands of these immigrants. So that product is that's where our focus is right now in terms of that. But just to wrap up with the federal money that's coming down from the American Rescue Plan, there's a initiative called Community Navigators, which is, it just basically pays people to go out and talk to business owners and, sort of, help facilitate resources. So we're trying to tap into that to really make a profound impact in terms of getting our resources in the hands of the people who need them. So I'll stop there and let Jeremy, take it over from there.
Yeah, so we have an idea of what's coming down for ARP, American Rescue Plan, but we don't know what that guidance is on the funding, and it's not due until the fall. So, we'll continue to advocate for funding for the underserved communities through funding out of the ARP, but at this time, we're really waiting for more guidance. However, that being said, we're still going to implement a strategy that worked really well for us through Welcoming America, which is being very strategic about funding. So what that means is, so we're looking at this as if we get a big influx of federal funding, we are actually thinking of funneling that towards affordable housing development, which releases more local flexible funding for us for more like the rental assistance programs. So we're kind of thinking of that way of like, more federal funding is great, but if we can swap it out and be strategic and still save more flexible money for the underserved communities like immigrants and refugees, it's a win-win. Other than the ARP, we've been able to set up a framework for this work that we're going to build upon to ensure that these efforts are sustainable. So we have an MOU with Welcoming Pittsburgh to really formalize this working relationship and make sure that whether it's me, peers, or someone else that's at the URA, that this work continues and it's not dependent on us individuals. And additionally, we've begun planning a program that Pierce kind of alluded to, the kind of community ambassador program to really empower, natural community leaders within the immigrant and refugee groups to be those leaders, and help us with these housing and business program offerings. And I'll just wrap up with this note that, what really spurred that idea is we met with another Welcoming America alum, I guess you could say, agency from Vermont, who's running a community engagement ambassador program. And I just want to say about how great it was to be able to connect with them through the Welcoming America network and share their ideas and take some lessons learned from what they're doing so that we can apply it to what we're trying to do in Pittsburgh. Just another great reason of, being part of this network.
Thanks, Jeremy. And just listening to both of you, Jeremy and Pierce, and also just in the course of preparing for this session today, I think it's really interesting that I think there are a lot of common approaches and themes, right, in our the way that we work. And even though we sit in two very different locations at two very different organizations, and some of the common keys to success that I heard in our time together today so far has been language access and going beyond language access. Working through trusted connectors, through those community navigators, and really ensuring that we are bringing immigrant leaders alongside the work and also centering their leadership as we continue to innovate and move forward. We also heard about community partnerships and how important those are in terms of solidifying, for example, partnerships with the equity, the Mayor's Office of Equity at the Welcoming Pittsburgh initiative. And everyone talked about that continuous input and iteration, listening, responding, and being sure that we continue to connect with the wide array of wonderful and good practices across the Welcoming America Network and Welcoming Economies Network.
Yeah, that's great, Gloria. I agree. We deploy very similar tactics and strategies. Even before we started this work, it seemed like we were still doing similar things. So that's great. So I know for us, some challenges that we're thinking about as going forward and how we're going to, come out with our next offerings of programs or services, in the long term for our residents. While doing that, we need to really stay mindful of how those program offerings are going to stay equitable and reach the people that they're intended to reach. So, for us, we need to ensure that the work continues with this kind of unknown of funding and a constantly changing environment of rental program rules and who qualifies and how to apply, and it seems like it's constantly changing. So as we continue to revamp and change and improve our programs, something that could pose a challenge is just kind of being on top of all of that and trying to stay flexible in our programs, because that's been the key to success of getting the funding out the door, while this unknown of what funding is going to come down the line. So Gloria, back to you. What challenges do you expect coming up, and how do you plan to address those?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and like you shared, there are a lot of challenges, right, coming down the pipeline. And I love what you were sharing about making sure to formalize MOUs to ensure that the work continues and really isn't dependent on different individuals. And as I was reflecting on this, to be honest, I was thinking a lot about my team and the fact that they are, me included, are incredibly tired and emotionally exhausted right now. And I'm sure that many, many, many people on this call today, or this session today, can relate to that. And when your leaders and innovators and trusted connectors are tired, we are not sharp, we're not as flexible, we're not as agile, right, to continue to doing the incredible work that we were doing prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic. And I think for us, it's meant that it's become easier for us to feel beholden to deliverables, for example, and that we aren't taking the necessary care and time to stop and to think and to reflect with each other. So for me, I think forwarding equitable access through the different challenges that we will continue to face must include creating a healthier workplace environment and sustainable workloads. That means making our current processes more cohesive and efficient, taking the time to reflect on the ways that we've expanded to respond to community needs over the past year, and to make those processes just improve upon them and provide any necessary training or upskilling opportunities that are needed to bridge different expertise or just knowledge gap areas, and also really carving and protecting space for our team together with our partners to continually think together about how we can improve and refine our work with an equity lens, so that we can continue to really address the day-to-day pressing needs without reinforcing systems of inequality, because we're not spending enough time thinking about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we're doing it. And so I work with an unbelievably creative, dynamic, and resilient team, many of who are here today and making our community better each and every day. And I really want us to be able to bring the very best of our talent and our energy for the long haul. So as I'm thinking about challenges, I think that would be just a key piece in making sure that our team is healthy and ready to go. And so we'll continue to navigate the challenge of pushing for the protection and the long-term flourishing of the immigrant communities that we're part of and that we love so much by encouraging equitable policies and allocation of personnel and resources, not only as we're looking strategically at funding for ourselves, but also as we're in those conversations with our partner entities and stakeholders in the arena of economic opportunity, housing, healthcare, and so much more. So to turn it back over to you guys, Jeremy, do you have any advice with regard to what you would give other public sector actors who are looking for creative ways to get funds into the hands of immigrant renters, home buyers, and business owners moving forward? You touched on this a little bit earlier with regard to creating flexible funding streams, but tell us more.
Yeah, thanks, Gloria. And before I give my answer, I do want to just tell you how much I appreciate you and your team. When you speak about your work, it's quite obvious you are very passionate about this, and so is your team, and I really appreciate that. So coming back to your question, if I can summarize it in one word, like public sector actors working in the space, advocate. This is our role. And for me, I take it very personally. My mom was an immigrant from Vietnam, and I have committed my work in housing to make sure that immigrants and refugees have fair and equitable access to housing and other basic needs. So I will always come back to advocating, and I feel very humbled and fortunate to be in this position in Pittsburgh to make those changes and to advocate. But as public servants, I think we have the opportunity and responsibility to ensure that we push equitable access. I think this can often get lost in discussion when cities are trying to manage pushing out programs and funding, especially now. But I want to challenge all public sector actors to use their position in government to elevate equity issues in everything that we do. And lastly, think creatively. Government typically isn't the first to try new things, but old ways often fail immigrant and refugee residents. So we need new ideas, we need new strategies, and a commitment to keep pushing equity. And so that's my advice.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. I'm gonna shoot this question back to you, Gloria. So Jeremy and I are at the URA, and your YMCA is just, has partnered with the basically URA equivalent, in your area. What advice would you give, other organizations, nonprofits who are looking to partner with the URA or an economic development agency in their region for this sort of work?
Yeah, and so I would say, as you can recall, just all the way back in the beginning when I was talking a little bit about how our relationship with the Economic Development Corporation started somewhere, and it's built itself over the course of several years. Right. And so that trust, those relationships, that understanding of processes at both organizations and staff, and, who are the connectors amongst the staff, takes time to build. But I would encourage you folks to start the conversation, if you haven't already, to reach out to your local economic development authority or agency or equivalent and share about your community with them, share about what you're seeing, understand their goals, take the time to listen to them, and then find areas of complementary and shared work where you can really harness the energy that both sides have in trying to meet and create economic opportunities for immigrants to really thrive and flourish. And I would say also, like, take advantage of the people who are in this session today. All of us who are presenting, Christina, Steve over at Global Detroit, look into the Welcoming Economies program, just network with one another. I think you've heard a lot from each of us today that we love to learn from different communities and adapt and contextualize those really awesome and innovative ideas in ways that best serve our immediate communities. And we can really do that well, I think, by working in partnership with local government, with local economic development authorities, and more. What about the two of you? Anything that you would add from your perspective to that?
I just would just reiterate just one of the points you made about just, partnership. I think that's the most important thing, just for anyone in the audience. There's no reason to feel like you need to do all this on your own. There's no reason to recreate the wheel. There's a lot of people, a lot of organizations, out doing the work. So it's just time to connect, and it's a lot easier just working together than, working apart and, trying to, recreate things that, other organizations already have. So, the sooner we come together, the sooner that we all can, get to we're all trying to help, our immigrant community. So, as soon as we start working together, that synergy will, get us to our goals a lot quicker. That's all I have, though.
Wow. Well, I think I speak on behalf of all our audience. I'm seeing in the chat too, just, what a powerful, informative, and really touching discussion this has been. I'm really humbled to hear about your learning, your passion, dedication. The three of you have done really motivating, inspirational work in Pittsburgh and in Champaign County. And I'm really happy that we have some time left for questions. We've had a few come in through the chat, so thanks for sticking around for that. So if anybody hasn't entered a question and you have something on your mind as you've been listening to our amazing presenters today, please go ahead and chat those in. And I want to start with one that came in that really speaks to and acknowledges, as you did, Gloria, how challenging the work that you all are doing and so many people listening in today are, more than a year into the pandemic, dealing with long-term ongoing structural racism, xenophobia, and othering. And we know there's an expected long recovery period ahead. We're talking about really through the pandemic and beyond. So this person asks, what is giving you hope or motivating you right now? And I'd love for anybody to jump in on this, and then we'll kind of do a round robin with this one.
I'll jump in. I agree. It's been challenging. There's been burnout. There's been Zoom fatigue, right? But I am fortunate to work with a very, very passionate team to run these programs. And for us, it's been celebrating the small wins, which we think are big wins. But 130 immigrant households preventing from being evicted is one of the first ones that we were like, yes, we're doing something. And just the other small wins of, people coming to us and saying, this program is really the only program that is working for the immigrants and refugees that I serve because of how it's designed, because of the steps you guys have taken. And it's one email out of 100 that I'll get that day, but those are the types of things that really motivate us and gives us, a lot of energy to keep going and keep innovating. So it's celebrating the small wins.
I guess I would add that for me, one of the things that keeps me going and motivated is just the incredible community that we have locally and their commitment to really making it out to the other side of the pandemic stronger as a community. And so this comes through the form of folks asking to volunteer. It comes through the form of people driving weekly grocery deliveries, for example, to families impacted by the pandemic. It comes in the form of unexpected checks from different organizations who decide to allocate a share of their annual fundraisers, for example, to support our immigrant relief funds. It comes from just the stories of different folks who have landed on firmer footing in recent months. And I think, those and many more are some of the things that keep me going, just the spirit of kind of mutual aid that has been so apparent in the community, and giving me the confidence and the hope that, maybe it's COVID right now, who knows what's coming next, but together we can work through it.
I'll jump in and be really brief. I have a really specific example, after, because I go and I speak about our products, to audiences all the time. So I'm always talking about the things we offer. So, receiving an email or a call from one of our, trusted partners that represents, a large Hispanic sort of population. And they're like, wow, I didn't know, that you already even did this thing. We have clients who, after me telling them about what, what it is you guys do, they don't have a social security number, they don't speak English, but they're interested, they want to work, with you guys. So, hearing those sorts of stories, we know that there's going to be a tomorrow. And those are the things that are really inspiring. Hearing those sorts of things about this work that, once we sort of made that shift, we know that, it made a change. And now, we're looking forward to the future for sure.
Well, thank you all. And Pierce, you all inspire us here at Welcoming America, our partners at Global Detroit, and, taking the time to share your learning with us here today, I think helps us all to keep going in the long haul. I want to go to another question that came in from the audience around how have you worked to ensure that immigrant residents are in a position of leadership or have really meaningful input with recovery efforts? And Gloria, I'd like to go to you, and then Jeremy, Pierce, if you'd like to add anything, we'll go to you after.
Yeah, so this comes, I think, in some different ways. So one way is through the staffing that we have at the Y itself, in terms of making intentional decisions to be hiring, working with, developing, equipping immigrant leaders to partner with us in our work, to lead our work, and to, be those trusted connectors in different places, and also to have those regular conduits of feedback that we can then raise to a higher degree of visibility. Another way that we do this is through members of our advisory board, which are made up of folks from a lot of different sectors, from elected government to local business to the nonprofit sector, faith communities, and immigrant leaders who aren't otherwise represented in those areas. And so throughout the pandemic, we've really taken the time to reach out to them, to learn about and understand what they're seeing, so that we can continue tailoring the responses, convening different meetings with folks, and also working in partnership to connect them directly, for example, to the local city governments, so they can have a direct connection that is not facilitated, for example, through our organization. And so those are a few ways that we've been doing that.
That's great, Gloria. So to answer your question, Christine, I'm going to go back to something Pierce and I alluded to earlier, which is the community engagement ambassador program that we're trying to build up. So the premise of that really is to empower those community leaders that are already natural leaders in their communities, and work collaboratively with them to to know and to help spread the word about the housing and business services that the URA has to offer, working through and with Welcoming Pittsburgh. What's nice is that there's already a productive group in Pittsburgh. There's actually 60 different immigrant and refugee groups that are actively meeting almost weekly. And so there's already kind of a good framework for this of what we want to do. We're just going to kind of build upon that and make sure that we build in some opportunities for two-way communication. So we don't want to just give our information about our programs, but we want to build in mechanisms to hear directly from those groups on what's working, what isn't working, and what's missing, and what maybe what's working, but mostly kind of what's still needed, so that we can try to meet those unmet needs that are often gaps in service.
Thanks so much, Jeremy and Gloria. I think those are all good examples of sort of the array of methods for that community input and really meaningful engagement and leadership from immigrant residents and communities. So thanks for walking us through that. We have another question that came in here, which really starts with a comment that we're seeing more and more attention and commitment at the local level to using a racial equity lens and looking at racially disaggregated data in recovery. And there's a lot of different federal efforts and national organizations looking at this, but really that's happening at the local level as we start to look at what's coming up. So this person's wondering, how were you able to advocate internally or with partners to ensure that immigrant residents' overlapping, but also particular needs and assets are really built into that conversation around equity? And what did that internal process and thinking look like in terms of strategic plans or other things that might be going on at your agency? So Jeremy and Pierce, I think I'll start with you at the URA if either of you would like to jump in on this one.
Sure, I'll jump in. This is a really interesting question just because we've actually experienced some challenges around this, because one of the things that we were doing where we were trying to create a directory with the mayor's office and Welcome Pittsburgh for immigrant-based businesses. But one of the challenges that we were running into is that, some of the feedback we got is like, okay, do I want to identify as X? Because of, some, the racial climate and, some of the challenges that, come with that. So that is something that we are currently exploring, and it is a challenge. So it's definitely something for us to consider. So I think our approach is just really, doing it on a sort of one-by-one basis with the businesses, getting their feedback to understand, like, is this what you want to project, as in terms of, representing your business, hearing, some of the feedback as it relates to why they wouldn't necessarily want to, identify as such, and, just trying to take all that in consideration, but still create resources around making sure that, the awareness around their business is still there. So like I said, it's not anything that we've already sort of addressed. It's something that we're trying to work through. And there's definitely challenges as it relates to that, but we're working on it for sure.
Thanks, Pierce. I appreciate you kind of speaking honestly to that challenge that you've run into and looking at your business directory and how folks want to identify and self-identify. And I know you had some internal discussions as well around your data disaggregation and what was disaggregated by race, but maybe not by ethnicity or by language spoken or national origin. And that's something that you all thought really thoughtfully about. And actually relates here to another question we got, which was around what advice would you give about data collection? So I wonder if you'd like to speak a little bit more on that topic, and again, how it relates to sort of that racially disaggregated data and then bringing in the overlapping immigrant identity. Jeremy, do you want to speak to this in the housing context?
So we had a similar obstacle that Pierce talked about, which was, yes, we wanted to know this information. We wanted to know who's accessing the programs, but we also really did not want to unintentionally turn people away by having a question on the intake, such as, do you identify as an immigrant or refugee? So we had some really good conversations with Welcoming America and Global Detroit on kind of how to navigate that concern, and got some pretty good ideas and strategies on how to do that. And so we kind of had to get past that fear of, is this gonna unintentionally turn people away? Is this, should we be asking this on intake? And kind of balancing what we really want in terms of data and trying to make sure the program feels accessible. So, we implemented that pretty early on in 2020, and now, a year of data, we're able to see who we're helping. And I think it was just carefully crafting how we word those questions But because now we're able to know that we helped 130 households without asking that question, even on an intake, we wouldn't know.
Great, thanks for that, Jeremy. And Pierce, I saw you unmute. Did you have a piece on this as well?
I just remember those conversations. I remember when we were trying to figure out, the most appropriate way to ask, because, some of the people applying might feel that, them answering a certain type of way would, exclude them, from receiving whatever resources that, we were trying to, distribute. So I think one of the things that we came up with was some language, more of like a disclaimer that, explain why we were trying to collect that data, just so it was clear, on the onset that, this wasn't to make any sort of determination, but it was just used for our sort of internal purposes. So we know exactly, where, our dollars are being used and what communities that, we're hitting, as well as where we, when we get that data back at the end, it lets us know where we need to do more work at, in terms of, if we've only had, a smaller percentage of this particular group, maybe we need to, commit more efforts over there. So I just wanted to contribute that little piece of it. That's all.
Great, thanks for that. And I see a question around if we can share that language that you ultimately decided on when we send out resources next week. All right, I'm seeing nods. Yeah, it was a really thoughtful approach, and talked with some other organizations too around how they've done that. Thank you both. And Gloria, I'd like to go to you. We had a question come in sort of related to this piece around the how the conversation on racial equity has broadened and deepened over the past year, and really what that's looked like in your community around intersections with the New American Welcome Center's work. You're in a smaller city, a university city, wondering how that's come up in this work.
Yeah, I think that just to briefly comment, I would say getting to a shared equity lens has been a challenge, and is something that we're committed to continuing to develop. And part of that is because we have very diverse and different immigrant communities that we're working with, right, who straddle distinct challenges during and apart from the pandemic. So we work primarily with the Chinese community, local Francophone communities, and Spanish-speaking communities from Mexico and from Central America. And the challenges that these respective communities face on the whole are very different from one another. And we have these communities working together regularly in partnership on different initiatives. And so it creates spaces and opportunities for us to have conversations around why we prioritize different initiatives the way that we do. And also opportunities to have conversations around, for example, different most recently in the Chinese community with the increase in anti-Asian hate and discrimination, having spaces to have conversations around that. And so at the Y at large, our staff and board and some of our interns and volunteers have been going through anti-racism training, and also trying to figure out how we can bring these conversations that we're having internally back to the community at large, so that when we're working and talking with our different partners and stakeholders, that we're not painting a broad swath of like how to make things more equitable for immigrants, period, but how are we specifically making things more equitable for folks in the Korean community who come from the local Maya community, or whatever it is, and making sure that we are committed to those tailored approaches and not just creating one size fits all solutions in that. So
Thanks, Gloria. And I appreciate you used a phrase, coming to a shared understanding of an equity framework. And I think that applies across so many of the programs and projects that folks listening in today are really doing and are undertaking at this time. Well, I really want to thank you all, Gloria, Pierce, Jeremy, on behalf of our attendees, for what has been an amazing discussion and for sharing your learning with our audience today. And I'd like to invite anybody else in the chat who's been listening to this and reflecting on their own work, to type in any of your reflections, ways that you're connecting what you've heard today back to your own work or something that you're taking away today. We'd love to read out a couple of those to the group. And I think, speaking on behalf of our attendees, we just are so impressed by how your efforts have been instrumental in getting business and housing relief funds and other supports into the hands of immigrant residents, up till now, and really moving forward too. So you've given us a lot of inspiration. And I'm going to close us out with a couple of housekeeping items. So I'm going to pull up something here for you all. I see a comment coming in from Steve Tabachman, who was and is so inspired by Pittsburgh and Champaign-Urbana. Yes, such a privilege to work with Gloria, Jeremy, and Pierce. Thanks for that comment, Steve.
Back at you, Steve. We learned a lot from you in Global Detroit.
Indeed, yeah. And on behalf of everybody in the program, we're so appreciative of the partnership with Global Detroit and the amazing expertise that Global Detroit brings from their local work that has been able to really be replicated across the country in so many ways. So a big thank you to Global Detroit as well, and to all of today's attendees. This session, as well as all of the others that are being presented during the interactive, has been recorded, and you'll be notified once all of those are available, so you can access these sessions and revisit them or share them with others at your organization who weren't able to attend. And we hope you'll share your learnings on social media using the hashtag interactive2021. I saw some great sound bites being shared in the chat, so we'd love to see those on social as well. And please do take a moment also to go back into the Schedule agenda and leave your feedback on this session. There's an option there where you can leave your feedback for all of us. And if you're not a member of the Welcoming Network, we invite you to go to our website, welcomingamerica.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter, and you can also learn more about membership levels and benefits. You can contact us at membership@welcomingamerica.org to learn more. And we're now going to be headed into a 15-minute break, and hope that you'll join us at the virtual musical happy hour starting at 4:30 Eastern. It'll be a fun hour of music, trivia, and a special announcement, so don't miss out. And if you're not able to make that, we'll look forward to seeing you all tomorrow back at the Welcoming and Interactive Day 2. So thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.